Welcome to Lincoln Fire and Rescue. I'm Dale Johnson. We're glad you're here. We will go back in time a little bit to start our conversation with Fire Chief Michael Despain. Go back almost 3 years. Group of 20 or so citizens from within the community, including myself, were selected to be members of the Lincoln Fire and Rescue Strategic Planning Community Stakeholders Task Force. This group spent 9 weeks or so immersed in everything LFR, from the condition of apparatus and equipment to response times to cost-benefit ratios. We learned a lot, way over my accounting education level, but we were there for this 9-week course. And in the end came up with a summary of findings, which included task force priorities as we move forward. That was 3 years or so ago, almost 3 years. So now let's fast forward. Today on Lincoln Fire and Rescue, I'm sitting down with Chief Despain, and we will review these findings, present an update on progress made in regard to these findings of the Stakeholders Task Force and the implementation of the LFR strategic plan. That's a lot of groundwork there, Chief. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming in. Curious about your thought process with this strategic plan, back to the birth. Why did you feel that it was important to take this on?
Well, some years ago, the industry in general recognized the need to make sure that we reach out to the customer when we design these strategic plans. In the past, agencies didn't strategic plan at all, and when they did, it was primarily firefighters looking at it from their perspective. And so eventually the group of people looked at it and said, hey, we got to make sure we bring the customer involved. Now, it's hard to bring 300,000 people into our process, and so we had to look for a demographic makeup that was representative of the community at large, and so that's what we worked on, to find those people that represent different aspects of the city, whether it's ethnicity, gender, where do you live in the city, are you a business owner, are you a renter, are you a homeowner, just all those different pieces, different age groups. And so that was the group that you were part of. And so what we've done is we kind of made a promise to that group to say, hey, we'll make it better, and here's the parameters we're going to work under, and you gave us some direction. And then what we try and do is meet about once a year, so this would be our second or third time meeting, to just say, here's what we're doing, here's the update, here's the progress, just to make sure that we're kind of meeting your expectations in terms of service delivery. Now, we went through a lot of detail that the average listener would probably not want to listen to. So today we just kind of brought out maybe some highlights, and we kind of call it things that are kind of exciting about accomplishments, like how far, looking back to see how far we've come. So
that's what brings the Chief and I together today for this conversation. Is we just came off one of our meetings here recently, toward the tail end of September. And so we have an update for you, and at the end, the stakeholders, on the little sticky note, we came out and we rated where we are right now. And we'll talk about goals. There's a goal and some numbers as we look back and look forward. But let's talk about what has happened since the stakeholders process began.
Right. So over the last 3 years, since 2016, here's some of the things that we like to talk about we've accomplished. So one of the big ones is our ISO class. We improved that to class 2 from a long history of class 3. So that's important for having an impact. We would call it downward pressure on fire insurance. Nothing's as good as good fire prevention and good fire protection, but this rates both the 911 center and the water system together, so that's helpful. Just within the last month, we opened Battalion 2. So prior to that, for many years, we had one battalion chief covering the whole city. So just picture one supervisor for 100 people every day. And the industry standard would be about 3 supervisors for that number of people. We were fortunate we at least got it to 2, so we kind of limited our risk and enhanced that level of service for those areas. And we actually got a new vehicles for them too, because the vehicles they were in were a little beat up. So we're pretty pleased with that system, and they're up and running today. So that's a big improvement. Fire apparatus is one that is a big ticket item. This is where a lot of money went. This graph here just represents where we've come, and basically green is good, everything else is bad. And you can see from 16 we made some good progress moving forward. And if it looks like in 18 we took a step back, that's just because there was a little delay in replacing apparatus, and they all get older as time goes by, and so some of them kind of reverted into different color categories. But 19 is what we're going to look like in about 6 weeks to 8 weeks. By the end of the year, that's what we'll look like. They're on order, they're on their way. We'll have 7 new apparatus coming in and improving the fleet health.
2016, in retrospect, that was a scary year. There
Yes,
were only
yes.
3 places that had equipment, 3 pieces of equipment that really were in the green category.
Yeah, and we saw that with multiple breakdowns of units on ways to calls, and so it was quite embarrassing at times to not be able to provide that service, but we're fortunate that we're much healthier today.
Well, with new rigs, you need a place to put them, and there are new fire stations and relocated fire stations.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we can, here's just the ambulance fleet, because it's a different model, but you can see the ambulance fleet got better over time too, and we would say that one has an impact too on saving lives. That one has a big impact on the emergency medical field. And then yes, stations. We are open quite a few stations, and we kind of joke that we have fire station opening fatigue, and that we'll have it with new apparatus here pretty soon, pushing the apparatus in. It's a good problem to have. But we will open Station 12. We'll have the grand opening in about 2 weeks, so October 15th is the grand opening date, and then we'll start working on the plans for when we open Station 16. But all those 5 new stations within the next couple of months will all be open and operational.
That's huge.
Huge
That's
movement.
huge, viewers. New apparatus, new places to put them, new stations strategically located. That's a huge last couple of years, Chief.
Well, and
Really is.
sometimes the nice consequences, a new station sometimes because it's in the right location and because it facilitates flow through the station so the crews can get to the apparatus quicker. What you see is better response times because it's a newer station, and it could be as simple as where the adjacent rooms are, the hallway, the size of the hallway, and that ability to get around the rig to get their gear on. In some cases, it's so small that they could get to the rig quick, but they have to kind of maneuver it, so their turnout time was slow trying to get out the door. So we're seeing improvements there.
In the case of 15, we have a combo. We have the police and the fire
Yep.
in the same building.
Yeah, police and fire in the same building, which has another side benefit of just better cooperation between those 2 agencies. And at the field level, I mean, administratively, we already get along great, and our public information officers are working together every day to make sure we're coordinating those messaging opportunities. But the field level is where the work gets done. So it's good to see that happening too.
New apparatus, new stations, new radio system.
New radio system, yeah. So that's actually being put into place today, and so as we speak, they're out doing hooking up the final radios, but we're operational as we speak, and so that's a multi-million-dollar project, part of the quarter-cent sales tax override that the community gave to us. So we like to say thank you. New stations, new apparatus, new radios, all that's thanks to the community.
What are you noticing with the radio that the public won't be able to hear unless they have scanners or some type of communication receptive?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably invisible to the average
Yeah.
user, but for the firefighters, it's a much more reliable system, enhanced capacity for interoperability between our other agencies. And then some of the finer points are just the quality of the sound is going to be better. We use the example of, there were tests that we were running where people had a radio talking 15 feet in front of a siren at full blast, and the people on the other end, all they heard was the person talking, not the outside noise. We've done it with chainsaws, we've done it with other ambient noise, and so that's going to be a huge improvement for better communication on the fire ground, let alone day-to-day communication.
Good. So that system's in place. Here we are now into the month of October. And you're constantly wanting to get new, fresh firefighter paramedics involved in the system. So recruiting and retention is important.
Yeah, we're still working on. Well, let me back up here if you don't mind. So our cardiac survival rate still continues to get
not
better
forget
every
that.
year. We have a number of awards that we continue to win every year. Other agencies all over the United States are still coming to us to learn those pieces that we're doing and try and make their system better. Yes, and paramedics was always a big issue in terms of recruiting and adding new people. When I got here in 2016, we had about 64 paramedics. Not all of them were assigned to the ambulance, but we had 64 paramedics we could put to work if we needed to. Now we have 84. We're doing interviews actually today for more paramedics for a class that will start in January. So hopefully you get that number just a little bit higher. But we're close to where I think we need to be healthy, so we're not burning them out, but we have enough to provide the work. But we continue to add firefighters all the time. This is a graduation just the other day, but we're already recruiting for the next group, and we still have an existing list that will probably happen for another recruitment, another academy that might happen in the spring. We never know. So it's just as fast as we can hire them is when we need to bring them on. But we're pleased with what we've seen so far in terms of the quality of candidates. We just wish we had a little bit more, and so we always kind of talk about recruitment and retention. So we always want to try and put the shameless plug out there for people that want to be medics and they want to come to work for us. We're always interested in that. But one of the results of that we're pretty pleased with is some of the demographics. So we try and one of the things that the group came up with was demographics and diversity. So we've been working hard to make sure we try and meet that, and we're close in a lot of areas. One area that we're pretty pleased with is the number of female firefighters that we have. We're just over 10% of our personnel are female, and that's about almost 3 times the national average for paid fire agencies, career agencies. So we're very pleased with where that one's going. We've got more candidates that we're looking at right now that look viable, and so we believe that'll just kind of continue to inch up over time. But that's we're trying to respond to what the organization or the agency was asked to do by the community, and so that's what we're trying to do.
Going back to something you said at the very beginning, and that is that other agencies around the country are coming to you and saying, how do you do this? How can we replicate that? That's the gender issue is something that I think they'd be interested in trying to improve on.
Yeah, and I think it's some of it is a little special to Lincoln because it is have that Midwest work ethic, and so for whatever reason we are able to, especially through the medic program, providing the ambulance service kind of opens a door that I think a few females that may not see themselves doing the role, once they see themselves as the medic role, then to make that step to firefighter doesn't seem so large, and so that they're more open to apply and come in and give it a shot. And we're very pleased with what we've been able to hire so far, and they're doing a great job, and it's good for the organization.
I said at the beginning that I was one of the 20. One of my biggest takeaways, Chief, is something that I heard as a thread through most of the time we were going through it, and that is we are at a certain percentage of something, pick something, whether it's a survival rate of heart attacks or whether it's response time or whatever. But should the public want it to be better, then you start talking about costs. ISO is another one. Could we go from a 2 to a 1, or what type of benefits will we derive from going to that bank? I really understood those themes that you had. The cost of getting better sometimes isn't worth the cost of getting better.
Right.
Explain that.
Well, return on investments is a huge issue, and we could spend. A good example is we could build 10 more stations, and we would cut the response time down a little bit better. But the reality is it would be a significant impact to the budget, if not impossible. But the return may be very slight. So the majority of that return happens, in the first few stations with the best geographic coverage. When you start talking about redundancy, that's great in the case of a major disaster, snowstorms that shut the city down. Then there's a little bit of help with that. You'll see that resiliency is there, but it's not efficient, and the long-term cost is sometimes not worth the other impacts to the budget, parks and recreation and other things other amenities we like in the community. So we have to balance that. But we do measure our cost per capita as kind of just a balance, and so this graph just kind of shows. This is a little dated because we don't have 2019 data. We have to end the year before we have it. But as of a few months ago, ending the budget year in September, this is where we looked at, and the top line shows what our regional comparative average is. That means most other paid agencies around our area, that's what they cost per capita, and you can see Lincoln significant, about 30% below that. In fact, everybody else went up a few dollars, and we actually dropped $1 or $2, so we became actually a little bit more efficient with our money. And it wasn't cutting, It was actually improving services, but it was improving in the right area. So put the dollars in the right spot.
As we look forward, what are the challenges yet to be met?
Well, apparatus and facilities apparatus still needs some improvement. We're not quite there, because remember that graph I showed you was the frontline apparatus. The reserve apparatus is all those bad apparatus are still in the system. They're just on the back end. So we'll need to continue to invest in apparatus. Our fire stations, the older ones, are in need of significant investment, and we've been kind of pushing that, kicking that can down the road for a while. So that'll be another one. Another one that is big for us is, our ambulance program is not taxpayer funded. It's an enterprise fund, just like a private business. And so getting the federal government to pay their fair share, and we've talked about that one before, is one of the big issues. So we continue to lobby for that, to get them to pay their fair share so that we don't adversely impact the taxpayers here, our local people. They're paying us less than fair share, so we have to pay more than fair share.
Coming out of that stakeholders meeting, I thought was an honest group.
Yeah.
We asked a lot of questions, and there was criticism, constructive, and
Yeah.
it was an honest 9 weeks.
Yeah.
And at the end of this update that we just had at the end of September, you asked us to rate where you think we are right now. And the goal was, I believe, just over 9. Was it a 9.2?
9.2 was where the community wanted us to be eventually, and that it may take 20 years to get there, but.
And the result when we turned in our little sticky sheets, I believe, was 8.2.
Yes, and that's actually a little bit lower than we were last year, but some of that has to do with a smaller sample group. So where we started with the group that was 20 something people in there, and then when we did our update, that group kind of shrinks over time.
Good point.
And that's why we'll have to restart it again here pretty soon and do another kind of a fresh scoop, out of the community to take another look at that. But we wanted to at least finish out a little bit of time with this current group, because they were there from the beginning, to see where that was. But we would still say we went from what I would say was a D+ in the 60s, and now we're in the B- to maybe the B, so 8.2, 8.4, somewhere in there. I still think that's forward motion, and we're still pleased with that. We don't want to give up. We don't want to settle. Our mission is to continue to move forward and provide good service and prove it with some data. But there's a thought and a feeling to it. Not everyone, if you ask, do you like your fire department, and they say yes, it's not always because of the data. They like them because they like them. They had a good experience. So that's part of what we do every day. And so that number represents a little bit of both. If it was pure data, it would move forward faster. If it was just feelings, it could go kind of all over the place. And so we use it as kind of a gauge, but at the end of the day, we'll take a healthy dose of both the data and then community support to move us forward.
Help me with this, but I wanted to bring this up. This just popped into my head. At this last meeting that we had, you were talking about shaving off time and how you were working, and sometimes you were talking about, we've reduced our time by 10 seconds or 15 seconds or 20 seconds, and I'm thinking there, in most people's world, that's just a blink of an eye, but for you, that could be the difference between getting to a scene to put a fire out in a room of origin, or have it spread, or have someone go into a different stage of unconsciousness that is harder to bring them back. I mean, it can mean a lot in your world, whereas in our world, it doesn't mean a lot. And I was impressed by that.
Well, seconds count in our job, but if on average we cut 15 seconds out of a certain call type, that meant that some calls may not, have been that. We may not have been that much faster to it, but some of them may have been a minute or two. So that it's a bell curve. But what we would say is that difference of seconds probably was the difference between 2 or 3, maybe 4 patients surviving a cardiac arrest, neurologically intact, meaning they got to enjoy life kind of back where they were before the heart attack, or the person that had the fire was not displaced. Their house was smelly and a little bit of water damage, but they didn't have to go live somewhere else for a year while the house was being remediated. If it was an extrication, was stopping the bleed in time to save the limb or save the life or get them to the hospital. So we'll take all those 30 seconds and 15 seconds here and there, and understand some of our stats will never get to zero. We'll never be 0 seconds for turnout time. And so what we do is we say we want to get as best as we can in each one of those areas so that the outcome is good for the customer. And so we'll continue to kind of attack all those different aspects of what we call total response time so that there's better outcomes.
Yeah. See why I'm impressed? See why I'm impressed with Lincoln Fire and Rescue? They're out there shaving seconds off so we can. It matters to the men and women of Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Chief, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you again, Dale.
It's been a pleasure for the last 3 years digging this deeply into Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Thank you for that.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah. And thanks, everybody. We're here on a regular basis here on LNK TV, updating you on Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Have a good day.
She's not breathing.
And now to that incredible rescue, all thanks to a very smart app for your smartphone. Now watch this big man springing into action. We got
Pulse Point is active in Lincoln and free in the App Store. Download it today. You could be the one.